Welcome back to another episode of the Timeout podcast. I'm your host, Amir Meritash, here with my co-host, Jan Nizam.
What's up, everyone? We're very excited.
We're thrilled to bring you guys a very exciting episode with one of ESPN's top reporters and Patriots insider, Mike Reiss. Mike, thank you for joining our show, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us.
Well, it's great to be on the Timeout podcast.
Timeout
Let's
podcast.
do it. I love it.
So today, in the time that we have with you, we'd like to cover two main areas of your life and get your perspective on both. First, we'd like to cover your career path and how you got to where you are now with the Patriots. And we'd also like to hear some advice you have for aspiring sports journalists like ourselves. After that, we're gonna kind of shift into more Patriots specific stuff and get your inside info and your perspective on some of those topics. So yeah, that's the way this episode we'd like it to go. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah, so Mike, you've done extremely well in this industry. So, how did you get started?
So actually, guys, when I was your age, I was at a high school and I always wanted to be a professional athlete. And unfortunately, I quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. And so my father was a sports broadcaster in Boston, Massachusetts. And he suggested to me, he said, look, you might not be a professional athlete, but you can still be around the professional athletes as a reporter. When my dad said that, I said, oh, I can sort of be like my dad. And so the way I got started was I went to my local newspaper and I said, I'll do whatever you want. I'll go cover high school games. I'll work inside the newspaper and take in phone calls and write up little paragraphs that appear in the paper the next day. And that's sort of how I got started. I fell in love with it, guys, from like the first time I did it.
Mm-hmm. So, what would be your advice for people like us and others who aim to get started in your field?
So some of the best advice I ever got was from a trainer, athletic trainer of the Patriots. And he said to me, he goes, you go to high school, you probably go to college, and in college you study for your bachelor's degree. Maybe you'll get a master's degree. Maybe you'll get a doctorate. He said, but there's one degree I want to make sure you always get. He said, it's your BT degree. I said, what are you talking about? His name was Ron O'Neill. He's a great guy. I said, BT degree? What are you talking about? He goes, it's your been there degree. I said, explain to me more, Ron. What do you mean your BT, like been there degree? He goes, look, I'm an athletic trainer and I can study what it means to see a player out on the field, lying down, unable to move. And I might know what to do in that situation because I've studied it.
Oh, wow.
But until you're in that position and you have to actually do it, you never know how you're going to react. So my advice, I tell you that story, my advice is get out and do it. You're doing it now with the Timeout podcast, right? But even more, like find your local newspaper, find your local cable station, find something that's a professional organization. Get involved, get that practical experience. It's your BT degree that will go along with all your other studies that you're doing.
That's very insightful. Thank you. So speaking of being a reporter for the Patriots and being with ESPN, how do you separate yourself from the competition especially in a sports crazy town like Boston?
It's a great question, Amir. It's really hard. It's really hard to do. And I don't know if I do separate myself, but I can just tell you how I try to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to always have great respect for the game, for the players in the game, the coaches in the game, and always put that above anything else. It's not about the reporter, it's about the game. And we are, as reporters, conduits to those who follow the game and the team. So what I would hope is that as I'm sitting there with a press pass, I always try to think like this, Amir. I say, I have a press pass. I am here. I can ask Bill Belichick a question.
Mm-hmm.
What should I ask him? And I'm thinking to myself, ask him the question that Amir is thinking about as a fan of the team who, before this interview, held up a Mac Jones jersey to show me he's a big fan. What does he want to know right now? What is he thinking?
Yeah.
Because if I'm not connecting with those who follow the team and thinking like them to provide them with a connection, a level of insight, a level of information on the team, I'm probably not doing my job that well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, so many of us are wondering, when you tweet out news and say per source, who these sources are? Uh, Obviously, without naming, what are some examples of positions that these sources are in?
So this is another great question, and one of the things you probably have already learned it, is when you're a reporter, you never reveal your sources, right?
Yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason they talk to you is they trust you,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? And you need to protect that at all costs. And maybe that's not the right verbiage, at all costs, but you need to protect that,
Yeah.
because if you get a reputation as someone who doesn't protect your sources, that people can't trust you,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not going to go that far,
Yeah.
right? So start with that. But what you want to do in any situation, whether it's Patriots or reporting on any team, is understand the dynamics of that team. And that's going to be different for a lot of teams, right? So with the Patriots, there's a very small circle of people who actually know like the most important information. And so a source to me is someone within that inner circle, right? And then that's for like the most important Patriot stuff. But then sources can be anyone like connected to a player, anyone connected to a coach. And what you have to do as a reporter, which can be really challenging, is find out, well, how close is this person to actually know the truth that I'm seeking, right? From this, about this player, about this coach. That's really, really challenging. And I would say my one piece of advice, if you don't mind me passing it along, is if you have even 1% doubt that this person is close enough to the person or the information, better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
And don't report it, because one mistake is worse than, 99 out of 100 times,
Mm-hmm.
right? Getting it right. Like that one mistake, you always want to avoid that, because that could really cost you your career and the trust that you've built up with the people you're reporting for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually really interesting. Just to follow up quickly, have you ever had an instance where you receive a piece of news from someone and you thought, oh, or you thought it was credible and you reported it, but it in fact wasn't true? Has that ever happened to you?
It has, and I will tell you, there have been times where my judgment wasn't sound. And I'll actually give you a practical example that I think is interesting here. And look, we're not all perfect,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're gonna make mistakes. So I always just try to say, as long like fundamentals, just always follow your fundamentals. And if you make a mistake, like at least you can say, hey, I dotted all my I's, I crossed all my T's, and I just it just was a mistake, right?
Yeah.
And so let me tell you the mistake. So it was back in like 2006, or maybe even a little later, and Lawrence Maroney was a running back for the Patriots,
Yeah.
and I looked on a database to check his agent, because I believe it might have been something where he was vying for a new contract.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that his old agent was no longer listed, and it was like either no agent or a new name, that was listed next to his name. And so I thought to myself, well, I should probably report this, because it might be something that people who follow the team are interested in, because this player is in a contract situation.
Yeah.
But where I fell short with so that's good information. It was accurate, right? Like he no longer had the same agent. But where I fell short was I didn't take the next step and either call Lawrence Maroney or call the people close to him to say, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And what it was, guys, it was like a paperwork thing where he was removing one agent, from his like group,
Mm-hmm.
but he was really sticking with the same group
Mm.
that
Oh,
he had had.
okay.
And so I technically was reporting accurate information,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't have the context. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. That's really interesting that it's like the little things
Yeah.
that you still got the piece of reporting correct, but the fact like
Small
people
details.
might interpret that wrong. They might think, oh, he doesn't want the same situation. He's looking for a change. That's really insightful.
Yeah.
Exactly. And think about this, guys. How do you think my story was received by the agents that he was sticking with? They were not happy with
Not
me,
good.
and all I could say, guys, is honestly, and this is, I think this is important too. I messed up,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Mhm.
sorry, and I hope to learn from it. And that's all you can do in those situations. But it's a lesson. Like here we are. I mean, 15 some odd years later, and I still tell the story because it's sometimes we have to make mistakes to have progress,
Yeah.
but you just
Mhm.
hope to minimize the impact of those mistakes.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like humility in this industry goes a long way.
It's well said. That's well said.
So thank you for those pieces of information on those topics. Now we're gonna switch gears into more Patriot specific stuff. To start off, something that we're both very interested in because we see the reports coming in throughout the day from you and other reporters. Do you mind taking us through a regular game day routine for you during the regular season?
Sure thing. Well, let's do a home game. That's
Okay.
pretty standard.
Yeah.
Call it Sunday, 1 o'clock Eastern time. The Patriots play in a stadium where there's just like a two-lane road leading
Hmm.
into it. So I always like to get there super early. So my alarm clock will be probably going off in the fives on a Sunday. And I like to be out the door heading down to the stadium in the sevens,
Oh.
and I like to be in my seat in the eights, so that gets me down there a solid, 4 or 5 hours before kickoff. I don't get any traffic. It allows me to get settled
Hmm.
at the stadium. And I might have work to do. ESPN might have me on for Sports Center, NFL Live, maybe not NFL Live, Sunday NFL Countdown,
Hmm.
and other, fantasy, the fantasy show we have.
Mhm.
So you're doing a lot of reporting leading up to kickoff, and you want to tell people what to expect, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, what's
Yeah.
the injury front? Thinking about fantasy is a big part of what we do. Game kicks off. I'm taking notes throughout the game because really what I'm trying to do is add a level of understanding to those who follow the team. Everyone's watching the game,
Yeah.
so they know what happened. I like to try to tell them why it
Yeah.
happened.
I've noticed that.
Ga-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Game ends
see.
at 4. What were you going to say, Amir?
No, no, go ahead.
Yeah, game ends at, call it 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Interviews with players, coaches. Maybe write something up, do a TV report, and call it leaving the stadium 8 o'clock. So it's a good long day,
Hmm.
but it's football. I'd be watching it anyway, and it's a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Um, so to your point about adding stuff to the plays and making people understand why, I've noticed you're very fast with your reporting and very insightful because when I'm watching Sunday Ticket, sometimes it's behind. So sometimes I get your tweet notifications before I see the play happen. And then
Oh wow.
I see the explanation after. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. Because a lot of other reporters, they just tell you what happens. Like you said, they're just like, oh, Mac Jones hits Hunter Henry for a touchdown. But what I really enjoy about your reporting is you go deep into it without, getting too deep. You're like, Mac Jones hits Hunter Henry on a nice corner route, beating the corner here, for his, let's say, third touchdown of the season. So I really like the way you add like a kind of second layer to your reporting, and it really, in my mind, sets you apart from a lot of the other reporters in that sense.
I appreciate you saying it. It's always good to hear the feedback because I think, and I take a cue from Bill Belichick in a lot of ways. Like, you always have to keep evolving and keep trying to find ways to do the job better. and
Mm-hmm.
no one has all the answers, Amir,
Yeah.
And so, sometimes I would say the speed of it leads to mistakes. And so I sometimes try to remind myself, hey, slow down,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't have to, if it's 1 minute later, that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
or 30 seconds later, like just make sure you got everything right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, from the current Patriots active roster, who do you see making a name for themselves and in this league and taking a big step forward this season?
So let's go with Ramondre Stevenson, the
Wow.
running back. Um, so to me, they're going to have to run the ball early because
Mm-hmm.
the
Mhm.
passing game is still sort of trying to find itself. I could be way off on that. But he has star potential, in my view. He's 225 pounds, call it.
Big dude.
And so he's got power, but man, he's got like agility and quickness and smooth runner. So I think he's a good choice, on the offensive side of the ball. I'll give you one on the defense just to balance it off. Jack Jones is their cornerback, actually closer out your way, guys. I guess Arizona State, not
Yeah.
that close, but out west. They really like him. He's a fourth round pick. If he sort of keeps his head on straight and you know buys into everything that they're doing here, like athletically, and skills wise, he's got like reminds me of JC Jackson a little bit.
Wow.
So I'm keeping an eye on Jack Jones, as a guy who he just switched his number to number 13. So that's always
I
interesting,
saw
a
that. Yeah.
quarterback wearing 13. But he's a guy I want to keep an eye on. It might not happen right away, but someone that I think has got a bright future if he sort of locks it in.
That's really cool. Like you were saying, like Ramondre Stevenson, from watching all these games last year, he's seen as like the power back. Even
Mhm.
though Damian Harris himself is a big dude, he's also very strong. But I think one play that stood out to me the entire season, even though it wasn't a touchdown, it really highlighted Ramondre Stevenson's, like
Love it.
his total game and how he's the complete running back in my eyes. The game against Carolina, he had, I believe it was in the first or second quarter, he had a run where he just bulldozed a, corner, and then the next quarter he caught a screen pass and was changing direction incredibly down the right sideline, then cut towards the middle. He took it for 40, 50 yards. So I thought that game and those two plays were a good highlight of the running back that he is and how he can really give you every side of what you need in that offense and can be a really good second running back option.
Man, that's really well said. And one thing to watch for with him this year is usually the Patriots have had like a first and second down running back.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's third down in an obvious passing situation, they would bring in, you know, most recently James White.
Yeah.
Before that, Shane Vereen.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, Kevin Falk, like that passing back role. They might not do that as much this year. They might actually leave Ramondre
Oh
on the
wow.
field on third down because of exactly what you said. He's sort of a combination of power back, but also has got like that pass catching ability to be a factor on third down and in the passing game as well.
Yeah, that's really cool that you believe that, like you said, the James White role, but also like last year the Brandon Bolden kind of role. You believe that Ramondre could work into a passing back role as well?
I do. And I think they might also leave Damian Harris out there at times. Ty Montgomery, who probably won't be ready to start the season with a right ankle injury, he
Mm-hmm.
would be another player in that role.
Yeah.
But they're sort of, I think they're adjusting the way they're sort of viewing that.
Yeah.
And they say Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, two of our better players. So maybe we shouldn't take them off the field all the time on third down.
Yeah.
Let's give them a shot, see what they can do.
Mhm.
Okay. So transitioning, this is a question that we're both really curious about to hear your take on this. So it seems like he's been here forever, but when the day comes that Bill Belichick is not on the sidelines for the Patriots and is not the head coach, who do you see as maybe the most realistic replacement for him or attempting to fill in his shoes as head coach? Who do you see stepping into that role?
It's really a good one. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I'm just going to give you one that came to my mind right when I heard you say it. Gerard Mayo. And I think Gerard Mayo, their linebackers coach and former player, remember he was drafted here as a first round pick in 2008. I think he could be a really unique choice, and I'll tell you why. I think he's an excellent coach. I think he
Mm-hmm.
knows the Patriots culture, but I think he's also someone who wouldn't be afraid to put his own stamp on things,
Mm-hmm.
and he's different personality
Yeah.
than Coach Belichick. And, not that you do it for this reason, but Patriots are one of the teams in the league that have never had a minority head coach in their
Uh-huh.
history, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that, again, not the reason you do it. You do it
Yeah.
for the most qualified candidate. But Gerard Mayo's been out on head coaching interviews the last handful of years.
Mhm.
He's obviously very qualified, a great individual, very smart, um, great personality. I think he'd be a great leader whenever that time comes.
Yeah.
That's assuming another team doesn't snatch him up first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that he's also loved by the players too. Like some of these guys last season, he was teammates with, like Dante Hightower, who probably not going to be back with the team. But yeah, it's cool that he can blossom from a teammate to these guys to leading them on the defense alongside Steve Belichick. But like you said, he could put his own stamp on things and make it his own. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So, Mike, we're very curious about your perspective on this.
This is the one we've been waiting for the whole
Yeah,
interview.
this is the most important one. In your 25 years with the Patriots, about how many smiles do you think you've gone out of Bill Belichick?
That I've gotten out of Coach Belichick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's a great question. Single digits.
Wow.
Wow.
Probably more. Probably more. Um, yeah, hard to put a number on it. I think the one thing I'd say about Bill Belichick is what you see in the press conference isn't always what you get behind the scenes.
Mhm,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
wow.
sure you both have heard that before. Just a lot of times there's certain questions you have to ask because it's a respect to your own profession type thing.
Yeah.
And just like we were talking about, like if we're not going to ask the question that the two of you are thinking about watching the game, we're not doing our job,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes those type of questions aren't the ones that will produce smiles from Coach Belichick.
Yeah. So you got to kind of sacrifice the questions that you think he would like to hear to what the fans would like to hear the answer to.
That's exactly right. Because when you think about it, what is the job of the reporter, right?
Yeah.
It's to serve it's to
Fan.
serve those who follow the team,
Yeah.
to help them understand what happened, to report news.
Yeah.
They're invested in the team and you're there to relay information to them.
Mhm.
And it's oftentimes information that Bill Belichick doesn't want to relay.
Yeah.
But if you don't ask the question, like I always sort of ask the question myself, like, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like this offseason that question that he doesn't want to relay the info is who's going to be calling the plays on offense. I've seen from you and other Patriots reporters like Mark Daniels, Andrew Callahan, those types of people that every answer is always it's a process. It's a long process. We're figuring it out, and none of them, even Patricia, Judge, they're back with the Patriots and they immediately know how to answer those questions. We're just doing our job. So it's been really cool to see kind of the attempts to get Bill to crack a little info, but it'll be cool. We're only 8 days away from the opener, so really excited to see how that goes in Miami. So yeah, that's gonna conclude our interview today, Mike. Again, thank you so much for graciously taking the time out of your day to
Mhm.
join us. We really appreciate you coming on and helping us out, and we're gonna be following your work this year. Really excited to see your analysis of this year's Patriots team. This is Amir, Jad, and Mike signing off. We'll see you next time out.